Okay, picture this. It's Paris. The year is 1720. A doctor is holding a noble lady's wrist, but he's not checking her pulse. His face is pale, he's sweating, and he's just muttering to himself, "It falls, good God, it falls, it continually falls." Well, the lady hears this and lets out this terrified scream, thinking she's about to die. But the doctor, he wasn't talking about her pulse. He was talking about his stock portfolio.
So what could possibly be happening that would make an entire nation so obsessed with finance that a doctor completely forgets about his patient, totally consumed by the fate of a single stock? What could cause a gold rush for pieces of paper, a frenzy so intense it would literally rewrite the rules of money, create a brand new word for the super rich, and push an entire kingdom to the edge of total collapse?
All right, let's get into it because this is one of the wildest financial stories you will ever hear. It's a story about a charming fugitive, a kingdom that's drowning in debt, and a revolutionary idea that promised to make absolutely everyone rich. This is the incredible story of the gambler who nearly bankrupted a nation. So, our story doesn't begin in some stuffy boardroom or a grand palace. Nope, it starts with a man who is on the run. A guy whose life reads less like a financial textbook and more like a swashbuckling adventure novel, filled with duels, prison breaks, and high-stakes games of chance. And his name was John Law.
John Law is just this fascinating mix of contradictions. So on one hand, he's the son of a respectable Scottish banker, raised around money his whole life, but he was anything but respectable. People at the time called him rakish and louche, which is basically a nice way of saying he was a charming but seriously sketchy playboy. He was a compulsive, high-stakes gambler. But, and this is the key, he was also a math prodigy. He saw the world in probabilities. He could calculate complex odds in his head, which gave him this massive edge at the card table. This dangerous combo of brains and recklessness led him to kill a man in a duel over a woman, get sentenced to death, and then escape from prison, making him one of Europe's most wanted fugitives.
So for the next 20 years, Law lives this insane double life. By night, he's a celebrity in the gambling dens all over Europe, winning and losing fortunes. But by day, he was playing a much, much bigger game. He traveled to the world's financial hubs, Amsterdam, Venice, Genoa, and he wasn't there to sightsee. He obsessively studied their banks, their trading companies, how they used credit. He was slowly piecing together this grand theory about what money really is and how you could create national wealth, not just dig it out of the ground. He was building a set of skills that literally no one else on the planet had. Now, while our fugitive gambler is out there honing his skills, the perfect stage was being set for his grand plan. And that stage was the Kingdom of France, which, to put it mildly, was an absolute economic catastrophe just waiting to happen. In 1715, the Sun King, Louis XIV, finally died after a 72-year reign. And yeah, he left behind the glittering palace of Versailles, but he also left behind a legacy of endless, ridiculously expensive wars. He had bled the country dry. France wasn't just in debt, it was completely, utterly broke. The treasury was empty. The nation was right on the verge of total collapse. The royal debt was at a staggering 3 billion livres. To give you some perspective, that was more than 10 times what the crown made in a year. It was a mountain of debt so high, no one could even imagine paying it off. The government's credit was toast. Nobody would lend them a single coin. The situation was it was impossible. To service that massive debt, France owed 220 million livres in interest payments every single year. The problem? Well, after paying for basic government stuff, the treasury had only 3 million livres left over to pay it with. It's like having a mortgage payment of $20,000 a month, but you've only got $300 left in your bank account after you pay your other bills. The kingdom was insolvent. And into this total crisis walks our fugitive gambler, John Law. He shows up in Paris, manages to get a meeting with the French regent, who happened to be a fellow gambler. And Law doesn't show up begging for a pardon. No, he arrives with a pitch, a radical, almost unbelievable solution to France's impossible problem. He called it his system. Someone at the time said that Law could transmute paper into money like an alchemist turning lead into gold. And Law's big idea was revolutionary for the time. He said, look, France's problem isn't a lack of wealth. The country has farms, it has people. The problem is a lack of money. The economy was being strangled because it relied on a limited supply of gold and silver coins. His solution? Let's just create more money out of paper.
The system had two powerful parts that worked together. First, the bank. He would set up the Banque Générale, which would be France's first ever national bank. It would issue paper banknotes, a stable currency that would make business easier and, this is crucial, could be printed to get the economy moving. Second, the company. He founded this gigantic trading enterprise, the Mississippi Company, and it was granted a total monopoly on all trade and development in France's huge North American territory of Louisiana, an area that stretched all the way from the Gulf of Mexico up to Canada.
And here's the stroke of genius. This is how he was going to solve the debt crisis. Law proposed that the government would let people who were holding its nearly worthless debt certificates swap them for shares in his exciting new Mississippi Company. So in one single brilliant move, he would transform the country's crippling debt into investment capital for a company that promised to unlock the untold riches of the New World. It was like a financial magic trick. And of course, the desperate government absolutely loved it. The public was hooked. The great experiment began.
And it didn't just work, oh no. It unleashed a speculative mania unlike anything the world had ever seen before. The entire city of Paris, from dukes and duchesses all the way down to butchers and maids, was suddenly gripped by one single obsession: buying shares in the Mississippi Company.
I mean, just look at this chart. The shares started out at 500 livres, but Law was a master promoter. He spun these incredible tales of mountains of gold and silver just waiting to be mined in Louisiana. He flooded the market with his new paper money, making it super easy for everyone to buy in. And the stock price? It went ballistic. It blew past 1,000, then 5,000, and at its absolute peak, a single share was trading for over 9,000 livres. That is a nearly 2,000% return in a little over a year. Insane!
The amount of wealth being created was so huge and so fast that the French language didn't even have a word for it. So they invented one: millionaire. For the very first time in history, you didn't have to be born a noble to become fabulously wealthy. A footman, a cook, any commoner could become a millionaire practically overnight just by playing the market. The entire social order was being turned on its head.
In the center of this whole financial whirlwind was this one narrow street in Paris called the Rue de Quincampoix. It became this chaotic open-air stock exchange, described as a piranha-like feeding frenzy. There were stories of hunchbacks renting out their humps as writing desks for brokers. People were just buying and selling shares from dawn till dusk. Fortunes were being made and lost in minutes. The entire country had stock fever, and John Law was their king.
But here's the thing about bubbles that are fueled by pure hype: they can't inflate forever, right? Eventually, somebody asks to see the profits. Somebody wants to see the actual gold. And when the Mississippi bubble finally burst, the collapse was every bit as spectacular and as devastating as its rise had been.
This drawing from the time just perfectly captures the mood of pure chaos and despair. The problem was simple, really. The promised riches from Louisiana, they never showed up. The company wasn't actually making any real money. A few smart, powerful investors realized the game was up, and they started to quietly sell their shares, demanding to be paid not in Law's paper notes, but in good old-fashioned gold and silver. And then word got out, and the quiet selling turned into a panic, and the panic turned into an absolute stampede for the exits.
And the devastation was just total. I mean, before you had the birth of millionaires. After, you had desperate crowds surrounding Law's bank, so frantic to get their gold back that people were literally crushed to death in the riots. John Law, who had been the most powerful man in France, more powerful than the regent himself, was now the most hated. He was forced to flee the country in disguise, totally broke, his life in danger. And the French economy, which had seemed so miraculously revived, was shattered. The trauma of the collapse gave France this deep, lasting distrust of paper money, of central banks, of stock markets that held it back for generations.
So, when all the dust settled, what was left? How are we supposed to remember John Law and his grand, disastrous experiment? Was he just a brilliant con artist who ran the biggest casino game in history, using an entire country's wealth as his poker chips? Or was there something more to his system?
And here is the most astonishing part of the whole story. The very ideas at the heart of this catastrophe are now the bedrock of every single modern economy today. The idea of a government issuing paper currency that isn't backed one-to-one by gold, that was Law. The concept of a central bank that actively manages a nation's money supply to help the economy grow, that was Law. Using stocks to finance huge companies, fractional reserve banking. All of these cornerstones of modern capitalism were first put into practice on a national scale by him. He was, in a very real sense, a man 2 centuries ahead of his time.
The consequences went way beyond just finance, too. By wiping out the savings of the middle class and shattering what little faith the public had left in the monarchy's ability to run things, the Mississippi Bubble is seen by a lot of historians as a crucial step on the long road to 1789. It didn't cause the French Revolution by itself, but it dealt a fatal blow to the old regime's finances and its credibility, which made that revolution all the more likely.
And so we're left with this question, right? Was John Law a visionary economist whose brilliant ideas were just hijacked by human greed and a mania he couldn't control? A financial genius whose system might have actually worked if he'd been able to hit the brakes? Or was he the ultimate gambler, a con man who played the biggest game of his life, lost, and took an entire nation down with him? The answer, a lot like the man himself, remains one of history's great, complicated, and cautionary tales.